Hi, I'm Alicia, Minimal Waste Mum, and I'm going to show you how to make beeswax wraps. Today I'm going to make a medium-sized wrap out of this fabric here that I'm going to use to wrap like snacks, like cut fruit, biscuits and that kind of thing. And I also want to make, out of this fabric, I want to make a jar lid. I don't have a lid to this jar anymore, but it's still a pretty cool jar and I want to keep using it. So I've thought a little bit creatively about how I can continue to use it and have something to cover it, and instead of using like a plastic wrap or something like that, that obviously you use and gets thrown out once it's no good anymore, we can use something that you can use a lot more times, something reusable like a beeswax wrap. So firstly I'm going to I'm going to try a circle shape for this one actually. And I'm roughly going to base it on the size of the lid here. So I'm going to use my little cardboard cutting board to cut a circle shape. And I'm using pinking shears because it will just prevent the fabric from fraying so quickly. Once you do put the beeswax on the wrap, on the fabric, and it heats up and it sticks to it, it will help, it will extend the life a little bit, but cutting with the pinking shears just helps just that little bit more in extending the life of the beeswax wrap. So my cutting skills are not amazing, but that's okay. It's just me going to be using it at home, so I guess you don't need to judge yourself too harshly on your cutting skills. Okay, so I have sort of a round shape here that I'm going to use to as my jar lid. Let me just make sure, yep, that will fit. And while I've got the scissors and the little cutting board, I might just square off this one and just make sure the edges are cut with pinking shears, so they're that little bit more neater as well. Sometimes you can see like where the material frays, you get little bits of cotton and that kind of thing. I should add that when you're making beeswax wraps, you should use cotton material and make sure it's washed first before you use it for making beeswax wraps. So this material is cotton. They were scraps left over from a bigger piece that I'd used for a different project, but obviously I don't like throwing very many things out, so I've kept the scraps and they're coming in very handy right now to make a beeswax wrap with. Obviously if you wanted to make a bigger beeswax wrap, then you would say if you wanted to make a wrap that would cover like a pumpkin or a large sandwich or loaf of bread or something like that, then make a bigger wrap. If you just wanted to cover some small pieces of fruit or something like that, if you were cutting them and not using the whole piece in one day, or cover the end of a zucchini or something like that, then you could make a much smaller wrap as well. So have a think about what you want to make the wrap for, and then think about what size would be good. And if you wanted to just double check that it was going to be the right size, you could just sort of use your bit of fabric here and just wrap it up in the cotton and double check that what you would want to use it for fits, and it does. So yeah. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, this is the part that gets a little bit messy, and you've got to be a little bit careful because we're going to be using a hot iron, which I'm going to turn on now. Firstly, we're going to get some baking paper to sandwich the piece of fabric between. So I'm going to put the fabric here. I'm going to fold it over and make sure that it is completely inside the baking paper. You don't want to have any bits of fabric sticking over the outside of the baking paper, so you just want to make sure it is going to fit. And depending on the fabric that you're using. Some of the dark or bright colours run a little bit. So this dark blue here, the colour might run once I put the beeswax and the heat on it. We'll wait and see. But if it doesn't run, if the colour stays in it, then this baking paper will be fine to use and reuse until either the paper gets worn out or until the wax gets discoloured a little bit, in which case you probably don't want to use it on another piece of fabric and get the colour on that piece of fabric. So now that I know that this piece of fabric fits inside the baking paper, you don't want to have it sticking out the edge there, or the wax and the things will run off the edge. I'm going to grab my beeswax block. Now this is actually a pre-blend that has beeswax, pine resin and some coconut oil as well. The beeswax is what will make it airtight. The pine resin is what will make the wrap quite malleable, so it will bend and you can shape it to the shape that you want, and the coconut oil makes it nice and soft. So these are pre-blends that have been made from those 3 ingredients, but you can use beeswax on its own. It just won't be as sticky and won't be as flexible. You can also use a combination of beeswax and pine resin, but it just won't be as soft then. But it just depends what you can get your hands on or how much effort you want to go to prepare. But this pre-blend here, I'm going to grate onto the fabric now. It's best to use a separate grater. As you can see, the grater has got a little bit of the beeswax pre-blend from previous wraps that I've made. So this is my beeswax wrap grater. This is also my beeswax wrap iron, and this is my beeswax wrap towel. Because as you're making these, it can get a little bit messy, and beeswax is really hard to get out of pretty much everything. So separate grater. Iron, you can use your general iron, but you just want to be careful that you don't put too much on that it spills out the sides. I'll show you that, what I mean by that as I get up to that part. But a separate grater for the beeswax. And it's also best if you do the grating when it's cold. As it heats up, it gets harder to grate. So keep grating. It's almost like grating cheese or something like that. Actually, that's what a lot of people say when you're grating it, ready to put on. They say like grate it and spread it around like a pizza. It's probably a little bit sticky actually, so it's not going to spread that well, but it's okay. So just sort of sprinkling it around like cheese on a pizza. Not too much to start with. If it's the first time you're making a beeswax wrap, don't put too much on because otherwise it likely will come out the sides, and that's probably going to get a little bit messy. But I'll just grate just a little bit more. That's not quite enough. So I'll just pull that out here. So the colder it is, the colder the beeswax wrap block is, and the colder the grater is, it's easier to get these looking more like pieces of cheese than sort of little clumps of beeswax. Anyway, I'm going to start with that, I think. I'll just pull out just a little bit more. I'm going to start with that and see how we go. So the iron is on. It is fairly hot. So I'm going to sandwich this over. I'm going to leave the grater on the towel as well so I don't dirty the tablecloth. And fold it over, and actually if I push it up closer to the middle, it will be a little bit easier. Now this is where you definitely want to make sure that all of the sides of the fabric are inside the baking paper. Because once I put the hot iron down, if you have a look what happens to the beeswax, you'll see that it starts to melt, soak into the fabric a little. And you can sort of use the tip of the iron as well to move the beeswax around as it melts. And make sure as you're sort of start in the middle and push the melted beeswax towards the edges to make sure that all of the edges get filled as well. This is sort of a big wrap though, so I'm just going to melt the beeswax first, a lot of it, before I then sort of push it around to the edges. Now I said before, don't start with too much because as you can see here, what's about to happen is this bit of beeswax has melted and goes right to the edge and sort of over into the baking paper. I don't know if you can see that through there. So, I mean, that's covered right to the edge of the fabric, which is good. You can see the difference in colour, the white fabric here, and here's where the beeswax is soaked in. So that's just what you want to do, is sort of use the tip of the iron to push the melted wax right out to the edge until it all soaks into the edge. Now here's where there's a lot that's moving off to the baking paper here. So you just want to make sure, probably put a little bit more on and show that in a sec. But you just want to make sure that you've got plenty of baking paper on the side so that it doesn't spill out onto the towel or the iron. Or like I do, have a separate iron. I make a lot of beeswax wraps, or wraps with people who are learning for the first time. So it does happen often that the beeswax does go off the side, but that's okay for this one. I'm just going to melt this just a little bit more. You can see how it soaks up, the fabric lets it soak up. You can see the slight colour change. You can see how I'm sort of directing the melted beeswax as well to the edge of the wrap. Okay, so this process can take a little while, especially the first couple of times that you do this. So it's pretty good to maybe have some music playing, or even pop something on the TV or something like that, and it's, you know, you can sort of watch or listen while you do this part, because it can be a little bit time consuming, but the more you do it, obviously the easier it gets, the more comfortable with using the iron and watching how the beeswax, the pre-blend, moves around the fabric, the easier it will be. You can see it just sort of spreading out there. So I'm going to direct some of it this way, some of it to this corner. Just slowly and carefully, so that you don't go too far off the edge. Right, now most of the chunks that I've done have gone, but around the outside here, there's some bits of fabric where there isn't any beeswax there. You can see the difference in colour, and you probably don't want to touch it just yet because it is going to be quite hot. But yeah, you can see the difference in colour, and you could tell by touch as well that it's not soaked up there. So, but that's okay, because what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grate just a little bit more beeswax onto it. This is why it's better to start with less, because you can always add more as you need. So I'm just going to grate. And just put a little bit. I can see this corner needs more. Down here, it's really the corners and the edges that you need to put more to. And this material is really helpful because it's white fabric, so you can see the difference in colour. Probably when I get to this pink one, it's going to be a little bit harder to see the difference in colour, or where I've missed getting the beeswax. You can see a bit of cotton there as well, so I'm just going to peel that off now. Alright, a little bit more down here, a little bit more in this corner, and a bit more up here as well. Okay, so I can put the closer baking paper back over, and make sure I haven't folded over the edge there, but no, that looks good. Alright, so popping the iron back on it, and just melt the corners here. I can see it taking up the corner. So that's pretty good, that's pretty well covered. And this side is pretty well covered here as well. If you sort of watch, you can see as the colour changes, you can see the beeswax moving around. So here's, I've probably got a little bit much here, and here's where you can see it going over the edge. So if you're sort of too fast, then it will actually go on the edge of the baking paper there, and that's why I have the towel there, so it can catch anything. That's why this is my beeswax wrap towel. Maybe try not to do that though, unless you are going to have your own beeswax wrap towel. I'll just move this around just a little bit more. I probably did put a little bit too much on, but that's okay. Just push it off the edges if there's a little bit much, and I'm going right along the edge, all of the edges, just to make sure that every last little bit of the zigzag from the pinking shears has been has got beeswax soaked into it. Any fabric that's left without it is probably, if you're going to wrap food and that kind of thing in it, that's the bit where it's going to start to go a little bit yucky. If it's not covered, because you're just going to have the food touching the fabric with nothing to sort of keep it airtight or stop it from going yuck or anything like that. This is the last corner to make sure that I've done. I'm just going to do this across the top as well. And once I'm pretty confident that the whole thing is covered, which I am, I've done a whole lap around the outside. I'm just going to run over it a few times to make it smooth and also hot, so that I can pop my iron aside, quickly pick it up very carefully because the beeswax is hot. So I'm just going to do this with my fingertips, but you could use tongs or something if you wanted to as well. Try and grab it by two corners, a little jiggle, a little beeswax back dance. And that's probably after another couple of little shakes, that's pretty much ready to go. It's still a little bit warm, so I'll just keep cooling it down a little bit, but that is ready to use. So you can see the colour, the white fabric's changed just a little bit. None of the blue circles have run, which is excellent. And that is ready. Still a little bit warm, but that is essentially ready to use to wrap food or snacks or something like that. Say you had your food here, you know, pop it down, fold it over, and then use like the warmth of your hands to squash it into shape, to hold it in shape, and yeah, reuse it as many times as you can. When it needs a little bit of washing or something like that, then just a light wipe with a damp cloth, not a hot cloth. You don't want to melt any of the beeswax again. So just you know, under cold water with a damp cloth. But yeah, that's ready to go. So I'm just going to put that aside and show you what I can do with, there's some of this beeswax that's left around the edges here. So what I can do is, when I'm making my next one, I'll pop that in the fabric again, I can actually soak, before I grate any beeswax on there, I'm actually going to just see how much of it I can soak up. It's probably not much, I probably didn't put a whole lot of excess on there, but it is good if you're doing a lot of wraps at once. It is good to try and use up as much beeswax as you can, rather than having any waste. But yeah, so I do the same thing with this one. I'm just going to grate the beeswax on top. It's probably, that won't quite need as much, even though this is a slightly thicker fabric, so it might actually soak up a little bit more beeswax than the other one did. The other one was a thinner fabric. It doesn't matter too much as long as it's cotton. You don't want sort of any artificial things in there. You want just, yeah, cotton, organic cotton if you like, but yeah, just make sure it's washed. You are going to be like wrapping food and that kind of thing in it, so yeah, so same sort of thing again, melt. I'm just going to check the temperature. There we go. Just melting. I'm just letting that, I put quite a lot of big chunks on there instead of spreading it out lightly, so that's moving around quite nicely. The paper's moved a bit, so that's, yeah, there's a lot on there that's moving around really well. Oh, you can tell a little bit with the difference in colour here, the bit that has been taken up and hasn't. So if you just look carefully at just the slight difference in colour of the fabric as to whether it's been soaked up with wax or not. So just pushing right to all of the edges, all the way around. Just going to make sure all of those zigzags have got wax on them. Just run over it a few times to smooth it out and make sure it's hot. Peel carefully, grab this bit because it is hot, and give it one more little shake, a little beeswax wrap dance, and yeah, give that just A little bit more, that one is quite warm, but it's pretty. I like this one. I don't usually need to paint very much, but I do like the pattern on this one. I'll just cool that down just a little bit. I'm going to turn the iron off because that's all for me for now. And yeah, that's probably, I'm going to let it cool down just a little bit before I put it on here, but that's ready to go as a jar lid. So that's all there is to it really. Obviously you want to try not to get bits of beeswax everywhere. I probably should have actually had something to sit this on instead of putting it on my tablecloth, because it is hard to wash out of anything. Take care with your iron and just not getting the beeswax off the edges. Keep your grater for beeswax. There's probably enough there to do another 1 or 2 wraps, so depending on the size of it, of course. So when you're looking at getting some pre-blends or some beeswax, just just have a look at how much there is, like how many grams or anything like that, or what the recommendation in terms of how many wraps it will make is, and enjoy.